Big Slick here, and today on the bench is a Phase Linear Model 2000 Series 2 preamp. The customer brought it in to address two problems. The first was that the left channel was dropping out, and the second problem was that all of these tone controls were quite frozen. They were very difficult to turn, and it looks like both of these problems were a pretty simple fix. I'll show you what I did so far. The first thing I did was to see if this switch was dirty, and as far as I can tell, that is what the problem was on the left channel, because just lightly pressing on this switch was causing it to come in and out, and it wasn't a solder joint problem. So as soon as I sprayed some good cleaner into this switch, worked it back and forth a bunch of times, that problem seems to have cleared up nicely. The second problem that he complained about, these switches being very difficult, these tone controls being very difficult to turn. This required a lot more effort. What I did was I pulled the buttons off, the knobs off, and the first thing I did is I got some good cleaner, like a 226, which is a combination cleaner lubricant, into each one of the controls, and I basically just flooded them. But that doesn't really solve the problem, because on these controls, where you get it not frozen but extremely stiff is actually through the shaft, through the collar. So what I had to do was get out a large, one of those 200 watt Ungar style soldering irons, and I heat up the shaft. I spray penetrating oil. I put the preamp up like this so that the oil can flow downwards. I put a squirt in each one of them, and then I heat the shaft up with the soldering iron, and I heat it up until I see the oil start to steam, and then I pull it off, put a knob back on it very quickly, work it through its motions, and I just repeat that process several times until you get them as loose as you're going to go. There's always a risk factor anytime you heat these shafts up. You risk ruining the element inside due to the heat. So you have to just decide how far you can push it, and they're turning pretty good now. I mean, I'd say they're fine. They have a little bit of stiffness to it, but each one's actually identical now, so I'm not sure that they're ever going to get any looser than that. Plus, even these other controls have almost the exact same amount of stiffness, even after being lubricated inside. So I think they're all the way they should have been from the factory now. And so in my just general checkout, which he asked me to do, I found that these two capacitors here were testing very high ESR, which I'll show you in a minute, or towards the end of the video I'll show you that on the ESR meter. And these two capacitors here were testing high on ESR. Everything else, as far as the capacitors went, tested excellent. A modern one wouldn't have been any lower, so I left them in there. So far we had 4 capacitors and just some cleaning, lubricating, and heating these shafts up in order to free them up and get them turned at a reasonable amount of stiffness. So now we'll go ahead and check it out on the scope, put it through its motions, and see how it looks. Another thing that I always check is to make sure that any of the fuses that are in any unit that I'm working on are the correct value. And checking this one here, if someone has a 5 amp in here, and it's only supposed to be, it looks like a 1/8 of an amp, a 0.125. So I'll see how low I have, and whatever the lowest I have is, I'll pop in there. Might have to special order this one. Good news, I had a 1/8 amp fuse in stock, so we're good to go on that. Okay, so I have the phono input connected right now, 16 kilohertz signal, and as you see, getting nice response on both channels. We can tap on the control, tap on the unit, no instability. So this was just simply dirty contacts, and I'll show you each one of these working. So now we're connected to the auxiliary input. Nice and solid. I won't go through each one because it kind of gets redundant, but I've checked all the inputs, they're all fine. Checked the response for the treble and the bass to make sure that they're adjusting properly on both channels. So that's all it took to fix this unit up. A couple capacitors that were out of spec, but at least as of now they didn't seem to be causing a problem. There was 4 capacitors here. These were 22 microfarads, and these 2 here that were in the center of the unit, these were 10 microfarads. So I'll show you the ESR and the capacitors and we'll wrap this video up. This was a quick repair. Okay, this is one of the 22 microfarad capacitors. This should ideally only test around 1.5, somewhere around there. There you go, 28 ohms. That's extremely high. Here's the next one, around 15 ohms ESR. So that one was toast also. These 10 microfarads weren't quite as bad. I cut the lead short on these, but I think there's enough here to still get a test. That one's testing 4.1. There again, you can get down around 1 ohm on these, so I thought that was a little high. This one might have been higher yet. Yeah, this one was 6.8. So since they work as a pair in each channel, I went ahead and replaced both of them. This was the one I was more worried about, though, getting quite far out of tolerance. So those were the 4 capacitors that were on the verge of failing, and that's a project. All I have to do now is put the handles back on it and ship it. Thanks a lot. Bye.